welcome to my series on the heroine's journey. I'm Susanna Liller, and it's time to find your happiness. Today, what we're going to talk about is walking in circles. And what that's about is the discovery I made of a fabulous tool for heroines, for anybody, to be contemplative, to see what comes up, to get quiet, and a way to do meditation, walking a labyrinth. But first, just kind of how I got to this point is an interesting story in itself, and it shows you how things come your way. Actually, this is the story of a mini heroine's journey for me. But we can also, if we look, and anybody who coaches people like myself, any of you coaches out there, you know how if you can help people remember what they loved as a child, that helps them kind of figure out what they want to do, understand better what they might want to do as an adult. And so looking back to my interest as a child, I was always very adept at path making. And I really enjoyed discovering paths, little paths in the woods and paths in a wheat field and paths in a marsh that you could take your canoe and they went here and there. And you would find me as a child, even as young as 6 or 7, doing a lot of raking in the fall. I lived in New England where all the leaves fell off the trees and there were a lot of leaves. My father was always raking up, trying to get out of the yard, but I wasn't about helping him. I was about using those leaves to create paths. And I spent many hours entertaining myself by making paths with the leaves and raking them into houses. So a path would lead to a house with different rooms created by the leaf walls. And I was really into it. And then, lo and behold, I become a business consultant and organizational development consultant. And I love process. I love finding patterns and finding the right process for a group to use to get them to where they needed to go. So if they needed to make a decision, I discovered decision analysis and a process to lead them through getting their decision. If they were problem solving, I had a process for that. I had a process for strategic planning. And it was such a fun challenge to meet a group and find out what it is they're looking for, and then to mix and match which processes, which paths would help them to walk down. So then, no surprise, when I start developing my coaching and get certified at Hudson Institute is when I discover the heroine's journey path, the pathway through life. And I began teaching that and helping people understand what that is and how knowing about it might help them, which is why I'm here talking to you today. So you can follow that thread, me raking leaves as a kid, to me wanting you to know about this particular path of the heroine's journey. So that also led me to another path, a very physical path that's been around for thousands of years, actually since, I will tell you, well, a couple thousand years BC, and it's the labyrinth. And the labyrinth, just to be sure you understand how that's different from a maze. A maze can have a dead end. It can have many paths going off in different directions. A labyrinth has one path. Call it a unicursal path. It's the same way in though that can be a really swervy path going in, and it's the same path you take out. For me, discovering this, it was so much like, here's a physical representation of the heroine's journey. But here's how I discovered it. I knew nothing about labyrinths. In fact, if you had asked me prior to January 2010, I would have probably thought it was like a maze. But here's what happened. Back in the day, when I had heroine's journey groups that I was leading and coaching them through and meeting them in person, we were getting ready to have our final 12th meeting together as a group, like a final wonderful celebration of the time we had spent together. And one of my students said, we should make a labyrinth and we should walk a labyrinth. Well, I didn't know anything about it, but she said, you can tape it to the floor in the studio and we'll walk it. And it's very contemplative, and it's meditative walking, and we can journal beforehand, kind of where we are, and then we walk it and we can journal again and we can share with each other what came up. So I got my husband to help me. We taped a labyrinth, a simple circular labyrinth, and we did it. And I put a bunch of roses in the center and lit candles around, and they arrived, and we had a wonderful evening, a wonderful celebration, and I was hooked. So then I did a little more research, and I found out that in the town right next to me, there was a church, a congregational church that had a huge canvas labyrinth that was a 13 circuit labyrinth, as similar to the one at Chartres Cathedral in France, which I had never heard of that either. And I could rent it. So the next group that I had finishing, we went there and we walked this huge labyrinth that filled the whole their fellowship hall. And it had paths painted on it in dark purple. And again, I was able to put candles around the perimeter, and we did the journaling before, and then we walked, and it took longer to walk because this was so much bigger. It was about 20 minutes walking into the center, and they would spend time in the center processing, praying, whatever it was they wanted to do, and then they walked out the same way and journaled again and really paid attention to what rose up in them. And they loved it, and I was even more hooked. So I told my friend Barb, who's very much like me in the spiritual sense and a master career counselor and someone who had been to France several times and spoke French fluently. And she said, Susanna, we have to go to Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France, which is right outside of Paris, and we need to walk that labyrinth. That's the mothership of all labyrinths. It's right there. She said, you walk in and it's right there in the floor of the church inside, and it's a beautiful cathedral. Well, you can imagine. I said, absolutely, let's go. And we were going in May of that same year, 2010. So I put my foot in my first ever labyrinth in January. In May, I'm going to walk the labyrinth in Chartres. Labyrinths have a way of doing that to you. So we go, it's May, it's cold in Paris, springtime in Paris. That year, 2010, was cold. There were women, there's so many things to remember about it, but in Paris, there were women on the sidewalk selling lilies of the valley, muguet de bois. And I said, why lilies of the valley? It's because May is Mary's month, Virgin Mary's month, and that was her flower. And also that was the first time ever I went to a cafe in Paris and I had shrimp with pamplemousse, grapefruit, salad. It was, oh my gosh, what a trip. But then we got on the train to go to Chartres. And again, this is about an hour outside of Paris. And everyone had said, you're going to be amazed at how the cathedral just rises up out of the ground as you're approaching. And there's miles and miles of wheat field. And then they were right, the two spires of this ancient medieval cathedral rising up over the wheat fields as we approached. And we got there and there's a courtyard and lots of people, and it's magnificent on the outside. It was built, they say, around 1201. And there's different theories about Chartres. They say maybe the Knights of the Templar built it. And anyways, there's many wonderful stories about it, but it's the inside that really gets to you. And for me, going in, the first thing I noticed was the stained glass windows, even before I noticed the labyrinth, because they are such a blue. They call it Chartres blue. They say it can't be replicated now because whatever they used and mixed to make that blue, we can't find it now. But they're stunning. And the whole cathedral inside is dim. The light is dim. And it was explained to me that that was purposeful because people would come to the cathedral as pilgrims during medieval times because the Crusades were going on in the Holy Land, and so people couldn't travel there. So they kind of called it the journey to the Holy Land, to come to Chartres on pilgrimage and walk the labyrinth. So that whole feeling of being in a slightly altered state because the light was different was purposeful, so that you would feel you had entered another reality on your pilgrimage, a more divine and spiritual reality. And it certainly felt that way to me. But then at some point you notice, oh my gosh, the labyrinth. And if you go on a Friday, as it was then, it could have changed, but I think, and it's closed in the winter, but on Fridays is when the chairs that usually cover the labyrinth are taken away so people can walk. And as you enter the doors, you go maybe 20 feet and there it is right there in front of you. And as I approached it, indeed, people were walking it, many people. So people come from all over the world to walk this labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. And yes, it's a Catholic cathedral where people come and worship every day, but also people who aren't Catholic from all religions come, or no religion, come and walk the labyrinth. So it has such a pull, and it does have a pull. And later I came to study with Dr. Lauren Artres in San Francisco, which I'll tell you about in a minute, who wrote the book, Walking a Sacred Path. And here's what the Chartres labyrinth looks like in the floor, inlaid in stone. And she said, the labyrinth's an energy field. And you think about it, and you think about all the people who have walked it as a spiritual journey since 1201. It would be an energy field. So there I was, getting ready to walk, and somebody kind of bumps into me one side and bumps from the other side. And I think, what is going on? Well, there's people that go there that don't know there's a labyrinth that they're walking on. So they're just walking to get to the front of the cathedral or someplace else. So I had to note that. And then I had to also remember what I would tell the women in my groups before we walked the canvas labyrinth, which I kept doing. I'd say, as you're walking, it's like you're walking the journey of life, and things are going to bother you and be annoying to you. And all those twists and turns on the labyrinth are going to be like the twists and turns you experience in life. So think about how you want to choose to react to what happens as you're walking the labyrinth. What will it teach you about your own patterns of walking your life labyrinth? And so I thought, well, I don't want to be annoyed at these people who just don't even have an awareness of what this is. So I kept walking. So the thing about any labyrinth, particularly the ones in Chartres being so huge, it took about half an hour to get to the center. And then when there's a lot of people, it takes even longer. But it helps to still your mind. You enter, which is kind of like regular meditation. Your mind is so busy and there's so many thoughts and what's this and what's that and why is that person doing this or that. But after a while, you put one foot in front of the other, you walk, you think, oh, this is going to happen because there's a curve here, but it surprises you. You double back with another curve, and then there's a straightaway, and you think you're nearing the center, but you're not. And it's just like you give up. Your mind gives up trying to second guess what's going on, and you just walk. And you find silence and quiet, and your mind rests. And yes, things do come up for you to consider, which is why journaling afterwards, at least, is so important so you don't forget. But it is a spiritual practice. And if you don't even care about what comes up or anything and just want a fantastic calming tool to have that you can do, then you find a labyrinth that you can walk. And now there are many, many places. Usually you'll find one connected to a hospital. Usually you'll find one, there's universities have them, schools have them, communities have them. There is a worldwide labyrinth locator. You can Google that, and people have listed their labyrinths. And yes, of course, now that the pandemic is here, the indoor labyrinths, like the canvas one that I used in the town next to me, they're not doing labyrinth walks regularly. They were doing them every 6 weeks. So I can't go there, but I've created my own canvas labyrinth, which I bring places, and you can do that too. And again, you'll find so much information on the internet. But back at Chartres, Barb and I walked the labyrinth, and it's a mountaintop experience. And then we find out that we can go to San Francisco to the home church, Grace Cathedral, of the Reverend Lauren Artress, an Episcopal church in San Francisco on top of a high hill. And we can learn to be labyrinth facilitators. So remember January, I walked my first labyrinth. Then these groups go through and we walk them. We go to Chartres in August. I'm in San Francisco, learning how to be a labyrinth facilitator from Lauren Artress. And Lauren can be credited with bringing labyrinths into the cultural awareness again. And what she says is that they come and go in awareness, kind of like in 100-year periods. She also has the theory that they come forward into people's consciousness more when we need them. And I would say this is a time when we need the ability to walk labyrinths. And so I learned there in this beautiful cathedral in San Francisco at Grace Cathedral how to walk the labyrinth as a facilitator and help others to see the benefit of walking a labyrinth. And again, mostly, what's the benefit? It's a way to still your mind, to find the silence, to find the quiet you need to meditate and see what maybe your soul is wanting you to pay attention to. And so that's my journey of finding the best tool ever. And it's interesting that Kim Sayward, the wife of Jeff Sayward, both of them are labyrinth experts. And she said that she put her foot in the labyrinth and it was like putting her foot in a rushing river and having it take her. And I would say that was my experience. I never looked back, and I'm still walking them. And actually, not only did I make a canvas labyrinth, a small one for walking inside, I made one in my garden outside. So I invite you to find a labyrinth and remember that the heroine's journey is much the same. The heroine's journey is our journey of life. There is one path into this life and one path out. And there is I believe, an underlying order. If you know the milestones and you know what's expected, answer the calls when they come. They'll take you on a journey. You will evolve and change and grow and transform as a result. It's the same as a labyrinth, the underlying order. It will surprise you. There are twists and turns. You'll make discoveries while you're walking it, but it will evolve you. Thank you for being with me on this particular edition, this particular video about the heroine's journey as I talk about the labyrinth. You'll find more about the heroine's journey on my website, susannaliller.com. You'll find my course, Your Epic Journey of Transformation, which someday I'll teach again in person and we'll walk a labyrinth. Boy, would I love to walk a labyrinth with you, heroine. Most of all, don't forget, you are a heroine.